Thierry Sabine, the founder of the Paris-Dakar rally, saw his event grow from a small adventure in 1979 to being a fully fledged international competition by his death in 1986. During that time, it would make the transition from amateur expedition to professional rally raid, but would remain, as Sabine called it, a school of life.
C'est une école à l'échelle humaine. On apprend en écoutant les gens.
There were just a few dozen competitors at the start of his first adventure on December the 26th, 1978, when the Paris-Dakar started from the Place du Trocadero in Paris, in the spirit of early adventure rallies in the 70s. Sabine himself had been a motorcycle competitor, and it had given him the essence of the event he wanted to create. Sabine took a hands-on role, briefing the competitors before each of the day's events. With little local knowledge and an almost alien way of life, there would be many unknown tracks to be tackled by competitors in vehicles that were little changed from standard. But this would be the beginning of a legend. The Africans welcomed the hero raiders with passion and enthusiasm on this, the first Paris-Dakar rally. Four-wheeled victory went to the Range Rover of Genestier Thiebaud and Le Mordaunt, but in the general classification it was motorcyclist Cyril Neveu who won ahead of Gilles Comte and Philippe Vassar, who might have won but for a stage cancellation. Neveu was not surprisingly delighted. Now that the foundations had been laid, this pioneering event could begin to develop. New Year's Day was chosen for the 1980 start, with the Marot brothers and Martine de Courtins amongst the stars. She was one of the first women to tackle the event by motorcycle. More marques entered, lighter, stronger, more powerful than before, and with factory involvement, for example the Volkswagens with Audi engines. Still some problems with suspension setup in those early days, but at least they had more ground clearance than the Renault 4 of Bernard and Claude Marot, an unlikely looking vehicle to tackle this sort of terrain. It provided their crew with an exciting ride, as they explained to the reporters of the time. The ride height of the machine was just one of their worries. There would be a great battle between the Volkswagens and the Renault, but on this occasion David would not beat Goliath. And the VWs of Freddie Kotelinski and Patrick Zanaroli would hold the upper hand as they and the Marot brothers headed for Dakar. The Marots reported just how difficult it was and how close they came to blowing an engine. In the bikes, the single-cylinder Yamahas of Neveu, Merrell and Clore tried to hold off the powerful BMW flat twins of Oriol and Fenouil, while the struggle continued between the Volkswagens and the Marot brothers. The experience was relayed through cameras and photography that was perhaps unusual, and Marot brothers themselves providing the onboard commentary. On the beach in Dakar, Kotelinski won for Volkswagen, and there was relief for Neveu, who won again ahead of Morel and Pinot. Once again, a big crowd saw off the field early on New Year's Day, sending the adventurers on their way from the Eiffel Tower. This time there was an official Yamaha team, led by Morel and Baku, to rival the BMWs and Honda. Their initial destination was the spectacular Tanasruf Desert, where navigation would become all important as the riders tried to find out where they were, preferring to stop and work it out rather than take a chance. For some of the riders, exhausted after losing their way and riding in circles for such a long time, the Paris-Dakar was already beginning to establish a tough reputation. Some competitors got lost in the desert even though they had just been through a village. They preferred to come back and try again in spite of exhaustion. In such conditions, falls were not uncommon, but fortunately none of them were serious. Sabine would brief the competitors every day, explaining some of the salient points about the day's event. All the competitors would be there to listen to him, even such stars as Jackie X. In spite of advice to be careful, the motorcyclists attacked harder and harder. In this year of 1981, Citroën entered a team to rival Range Rover and Lada. In Mali, a great duel took place between the big BMWs of Oriol and Fenouil and the more agile Yamahas of Baku and Morel. Entering Senegal, the desert seemed to be left behind as vehicles and bikes took to the water, a new flavour to the event. But this time the power of the twin-cylinder BMWs told, with Oriol claiming victory. At the great finish on the beach of Dakar, he led home Baku, Morel and Fenouil. In the cars, René Mech and TV commentator Bernard Giroux took victory ahead of the two-wheel buggy of Cotal and the Lada of Briavoine. But the most relieved man was Oriol, who would make up for his previous year's mistake. The helicopter had become the ultimate tool for surveying and controlling the rally. Like a shepherd, Thierry Sabine would watch over his ever-growing flock on this fourth Paris-Dakar. The Marot brothers had built a prototype Renault 20 with four-wheel drive and turbocharged engine to rival the lighter Mercedes, like that of Jackie X, providing a two-horse race in the desert. The burning oil wells at Hassi Massoud lit the bivouac during Thierry Sabine's ritual briefing at the start of the day. He would explain which helicopter was which, their various jobs, from safety to race control. And helicopters were also necessary to cover the rally, particularly as the car's performance increased. The Marot brothers' Renault 20 fought with the Mercedes of X and Jassot, and the Range Rovers of Mech, Zanaroli and Lartigue. Under the watchful and increasingly experienced eye of the locals, the duel between the Marot brothers, Briavoine, Jassot and Lartigue would become intense. The pressure on the Marot brothers was telling, as once again we rode on board in their Renault 20. Natural hazards, not only of vegetation, but also of a more active variety. And overtaking on these narrow paths, well nigh impossible. A continued discussion within the car between the Marot brothers as they tried to maintain their winning advantage and watching out for more of the wildlife nearby. Eventually they came through to win the event, ahead of Briavoine in the Larder, Jassot and Lartigue. In the motorcycle, Cyril Neveu on a Honda took his third victory, ahead of Philippe Vassart. The days of Works teams were still some way in the future. In 1983, there were 3 official Works Mercedes entered into the event, including that of Jackie Ickx and Claude Brasseur. More powerful engines and improved aerodynamics signalled Mercedes' intention to win in the desert. The rhythm of the event had given rise to considerable progress, which meant that an ordinary standard four-wheel drive vehicle had its limits. Ickx and Brasseur, penalised the previous year for missing a passage control, were doing everything to win, as was BMW, still represented by Hubert Auriol. Range Rover had also developed cars for René Mech and Patrick Zanaroli, but privateers were still able to be competitive, particularly when the pace slowed for survival. In motorcycles, the BMWs, Hondas and Yamahas were still battling for supremacy as they avoided the rocks. In the evenings, the bivouac was assembled, but barely anyone rested. Navigation, maintenance, preparations took up any non-competitive time. Claude Brasseur planned the following day's route, and Honda's mechanics rebuilt their charges, ready for the massed start the next morning. A big sandstorm blew up in the huge desert, however, making conditions virtually impossible for the competitors. Two helmets on sticks signalled to the organisers that there had been an accident over a sand dune. The medical intervention service helicopter landed as quickly as possible in order to evacuate any wounded. Christine Martin, one of the few women motorcyclists on the event, said she hoped to finish, relieved to have finished the stage, for others had spent a long night lost in the Teneri desert. The faces of other competitors revealed just how difficult it had been. We couldn't see a thing, it was very difficult. We're absolutely exhausted. All we want to do is sleep.
On arrive maintenant. Crevé sans avoir dormi. Voilà, bonne chance, hein?
The tracks now became more and more difficult. This was an uncompetitive liaison section, but still remarkably tough. However, the lead that Hubert Auriol had pulled out in the desert sections on the BMW would be enough to keep the agile Yamahas behind him. Jackie Ickx revealed his admiration for the motorcyclists on this long section, saying that 2,300 kilometers of liaison was very difficult, with tricky surfaces throughout. It must have been almost impossible for the riders. Hubert Auriol himself felt that the section would never finish. It seemed to go on forever and ever, while Marie Ertaud commiserated with fellow female motorbike riders. Not so much desert now as they headed north via Bamako and Miro du Sahel, with victory going to Auriol and his BMW in the motorcycle section. Auriol winning in the bikes. In the cars, it was Ickx and Brasseur who took the win aboard the Mercedes, receiving the congratulations at the end of the event from Thierry Sabine. For 2 years now, the Paris-Dakar had started from Place de la Concorde in Paris, home of motorsport's governing body. This in itself was acknowledgement that it was recognised as a major event, for the total number of competitors was close to 500 in all categories. Now there were many different types of vehicle, not only traditional four-wheel drive machines, but prototypes, such as works Porsches led by Jackie Ickx and René Mech, bringing a new dimension to the event. Jan de Rooij brought a new dimension to the trucks with his huge twin-engine DAF, giving some 1,000 brake horsepower. The motorcyclists, however, still drew much admiration thanks to their incredible courage. Sometimes it would be hard pushed. Even so, they wouldn't give up. It was such dramas and determination that would forge the legend of the Paris-Dakar Rally. The variety was considerable. But drama was ever present. The human spirit pushed to its limits and sometimes beyond. Competitors explained that professionalism was more and more necessary. It was difficult to compete now without a backup crew. Even such experienced competitors as former Formula One driver Jean-Pierre Jabouille agreed with the sentiment. The support vehicles were becoming critical. Sometimes, however, any assistance was too late. However, frontrunners such as Porsche in the car category and BMW in the bikes would not have such problems. Auriol and Rooij were dominating in their BMWs, while Fenouil demonstrated the dangers, thankfully without serious consequence. On the beach at Dakar, it was Metsch and Dominique Lemoine who won for Porsche for the first time. While multiple world motocross champion Gaston Rayet took his first victory in the event in the motorcycle section just ahead of Hubert Auriol. Thierry Sabine got a free bath in the ocean from the motorcyclists in recognition of his efforts. Thierry Sabine was still very mindful of the variety of competitors to be found in his event, how it should be run, and for whom and how important were the various different categories. A balance had to be maintained, given the varying amounts of finance available. Sabine, however, would have to take draconian measures to limit the relentless increase in power available to competitors. But for private or professional entrants, the attraction of the event was still the same, drawing more and more personalities for the pleasure of taking a risk, in spite of the demands of the event and the fatigue. Daniel Balavoine's face reveals the dramas and difficulties facing competitors. Princess Caroline of Monaco was less tired in spite of making some errors. Sabine would hope that this year's event would be better than ever.
Il y a une très bonne tenue et j'ai l'impression que cette année les gens ont vraiment bien préparé leur affaire, physiquement surtout.
Jean de Roy's mammoth truck had lost weight and was even more powerful this year. Once again, the motorcycle massed start was spectacular as competitors sped across the Teneri Desert. René Metsch was again driving for Porsche, but they retired one by one. The Frenchman would say that just one tiny mistake could make all the difference between winning and losing. And indeed, thanks to those little mistakes, victory this year would go to the Mitsubishi of Patrick Zanaroli with Jean da Silva. In just 3 years, the Japanese had learned to master the mysteries and problems found in the desert. In the motorcycle event, Gaston Rayet would add a second successive victory to his record, again with BMW. To them, the spoils of victory, followed home on the beach by the privateers. Zanaroli was delighted at his Mitsubishi team's showing, a participation which lasts to this day. (1986) was the year that a huge sandstorm, bigger than ever, swept across West Africa on January the 14th, 1986, taking with it the man who had escaped from the desert 9 years previously, Thierry Sabine. It would claim the life in a helicopter crash of the man who had given this rally its fame, the man who was its figurehead and who was charged with the event's organisation. Thierry Sabine was the father of the Dakar and remains so to this day. Before the accident, the drama had been fantastic between Porsche, Lada and Mitsubishi. As ever, the moments of respite would be very, very brief. Jean Ragnotti would help actor Claude Brasseur alleviate the tension of the event. How was it going? He was optimistic. Other competitors were also enjoying it.
Non, c'est génial. C'est super. C'est génial.
But the huge dunes of Erg de Bilma in the south of the Teneri took their toll, making things hard for the competitors right the way to the end of the rally. The motorcyclists in particular suffered badly. Cars too had their problems. Even the expert, Oriol, suffered after injuring his shoulder, which put him out of the rally. A Kajiva would not win this year. In the dust, the event continued to Dakar, the rally growing in stature with the competitors. The equipment needed to transmit news of the event was becoming more powerful than ever in order to communicate with the rest of the world. Having almost ground to a halt at Bamako, the rally continued all the way to Dakar in spite of having lost its guiding light. The caravan managed to reach the ocean despite encountering the most difficult of conditions. René Mech and Cyril Neveu would win this sad event for the rally, which would now never be the same again. Gilbert Sabine, father of Thierry, would take up the reins of control in the future, perpetuating the memory of those who had lost their lives on an event they had fought so long to establish. For this first edition without Thierry Sabine, the rally would pay respectful homage to its creator in the middle of the Teneri Desert, where a memorial stone was erected and visited by many competitors.
Nous partons en convoi vers l'arbre perdu, qui s'appelle maintenant l'arbre Thierry Sabine, où reposent les cendres de Thierry.
Gilbert Sabine, however, would respect several of his son's traditions, such as the massed lineup. For the first time, thanks to a change in the regulations, Peugeot were entered in the lineup, using the basis of their World Rally Championship cars. But the bikes, as usual, were spectacular as they leaped across the desert. An amazing job for the bike riders as they tackled not only the wide open sands, but then raced through the towns and villages en route. The rally was to some extent an education to all. The organisers would make it their responsibility that they would pass on some good to all on the route. Peugeot were competitive right from the start, with Finland's Ari Vatanen quickly adapting himself.
On va donc s'attaquer à 5 étapes.
Once again, there was the briefing before competitors set out for the morning, describing the dangers and pitfalls of new terrain.
Aujourd'hui, c'est une première. Tombouctou-Néma par une piste que nous n'avons jamais empruntée.
For the third time, Mauritania was once again a tough and merciless terrain to cross. The battles in the sand continued, and even the best could come unstuck here. The challenges remained the same in spite of endless difficulties. At the end of each day, however, there was relief. Oriol was once again competitive. Nevers and Rayet made it a three-way battle. The endless railway provided a guide for the three competitors, but not without their problems, for there were a number of punctures, making it very difficult. Hubert Oriol was one of those to suffer the punctures.
C'est comme ça, c'est la vie. Ce qui est bien, c'est que je sois encore devant. Ça, c'est important.
Nevers was one of those in contention as they waited for the winner in Dakar. Nevers was waiting to see just how long it was taking Hubert Oriol to finish off the last stages. But it all went wrong for Oriol right at the end of the longest rally. Heartbreak for the Frenchman. Oriol's fall at the end of the rally saw the win go to Cyril Nevers on the bikes, Ari Vatanen and Bernard Giroux in the cars, and Jean de Roy in the truck. The first time the Paris-Dakar winners were not received by Thierry Sabine. René Metz, the three-time winner of the event, took over the route planning for the 1988 event and promised a difficult start. That's just the way it turned out to be. In the dunes of El Oued, Hubert Oriol was one of those to be lost, the former motorcyclist now on four wheels in a buggy. But many other competitors would have trouble in the desert. Nearly a third of the competitors would see their hopes dashed early in the event. Tracks became more and more difficult. Sharing Peugeot's responsibility with the classic Peugeot 205s were Peugeot's new 405s. Pierre-Marie Poli had an interesting method of getting straight-line speed from his motorcycle. In spite of the difficulties, Mitsubishi drivers Andrew Cowan and Kenjiro Shinazuka kept their spirits up. Franco Pico would share with Claudio Teruzzi the fine cuisine of the bivouac, visited by locals whose country this adventurous would so quickly cross. The increase in performance of the trucks was becoming worrying, notably that of Jean de Roy, whose DAF was quicker than some of the cars. Tragedy was to strike, however. His assistant's truck crashed at around 200 kilometers per hour. Kees van Loewenzen was killed instantly, and his two co-drivers were badly injured. It would spell the end of the prototype trucks. Jean de Roy sadly retired his team. Whether at night or during the day, the pace had picked up considerably, both for motorcyclists and competitors as a whole. The sandstorm that René Metz was warning competitors about was just another hazard to be confronted. Ari Vatanen was leading the event at Bamako, but just before the finish, his car suddenly went missing, adding a bizarre touch to what had been an event tragically marked by a number of deaths. However, the car was miraculously found intact and Vatanen was able to restart, although FISA's rules prevented him from claiming victory. But the struggle between Peugeot and Mitsubishi was brief, and it was Juha Kankkunen who led home Shinazuka and Tombe. On two wheels, Eddie Orioli took his first win, riding a Honda, head of Pico's Yamaha and Gilles Lelay's Honda, the trio welcomed by Gilbert Sabine. Barcelona put on a great welcome for the competitors in the Paris-Dakar when they arrived for the prologue, and they were treated to the sight of Vatanen turning over his 405, although thankfully without major damage or consequence. In the dunes of Teneri, it was altogether a different story, where the sea of sand trapped unwary competitors. As usual, it was the motorcyclists who would suffer most. However, even Range Rovers came off badly. The Peugeots, however, didn't have the same problems, at least not initially, even though there were differences in the choice of route. The Peugeots were still very much the cars to beat, even if this early example of four-wheel steering was strictly unintentional. In the motorcycles, Gilles Lelay and Stefan Peter-Hansel fought tooth and nail. But Peter-Hansel would suffer the most, falling badly, which gave victory in the class to the great Gilles Lelay. Gilles Lelay explained just how difficult he'd been finding it. But he would be there for the massed start and the dash through the waves to the finish. Lelay's champagne contrasted with Ari Vatanen's glass of milk, their own way of celebrating each individual victory. in 1990, for the first time, the route took the competitors across the Namibian desert. Peugeot were once again up against the Mitsubishis, and Cagiva were again challenging the Yamahas in the bikes. The Italians were eager for a Cagiva victory and had developed their bikes with more torque, less weight, and a more usable rev range. The cries of the Tuareg at the bivouac, so typical of the atmosphere of Africa, was not the only form of relaxation. Jackie X was having a massage which was no doubt much envied by other competitors. Jean Todt had other things on his mind, for Vartanen's co-driver, Bruno Berglund, had been ill all day with food poisoning, and the Finn had also made a mistake, hitting a tree.
Peut-être il a mangé quelque chose pas très frais hier soir. J'ai roulé un peu trop vite. J'ai fait un grand bijou avec les arbres.
At Peugeot there were worries, for this was the result of the big tussle that was taking place between X and Vartanen. Out of the dust would emerge Stefan Peter Hansel, who would not win this Dakar, for he would not survive the desert. In Mauritania, soft sand would again catch out the unwary. Many riders and drivers struggled in this unbelievable sand which trapped so many machines. If they weren't bogged down in the sand, the Peugeots were in trouble with navigation, circulating like animals in a cage. The larders of X and Tarin were the first to escape in the Samaras, the driver explaining that even he was amazed at the conditions on the day. After the massed start for the dash to the finish, it was Eddie Orioli who would give Cagiva victory. Arriving in convoy were the Peugeots, led home again by Ari Vartanen and Bruno Berglund. The 13th edition of the Paris-Dakar would once again be merciless for the participants in an event which had now found its second breath. The problems of leaders and the dramas of also-rans fed the dreams of those who remained. Emotions came thick and fast. There was always the scenery, but also the constant danger, and of course, the sheer exhaustion. Not everyone was happy. There were those who were utterly worn out. But at the same time, other competitors were able to put their experiences into perspective and to gain from this great adventure, where self-importance simply doesn't exist. Prototype vehicles having little to do with standard cars were now battling up front. Citroëns replacing Peugeots versus Mitsubishis. Yamahas up against Cagivas, with the attendant dramas, thrills and spills. The hopes of Jackie Ickx and co-driver Christian Tarin went up in the flames of their Citroën, a chilling foretaste of a tragedy which would cost the life of Tarin 10 months later in Egypt. The technological duel between Citroën and Mitsubishi continued in leaps and bounds across the desert. But still, there would always be the problems of navigation to confront. The bikes would have similar problems. The crossing of Mauritania's Nega Pass wouldn't be so difficult this time, crossed in the opposite direction to the approval of Citroën and team manager Jean Todt.
Pour moi, sportivement parlant, ça a été un Dakar exceptionnel.
Gilbert Sabine would explain that the high degree of competitiveness in both categories was what the event was all about. A race all the way to the finish. And that race and the battles continued all the way to Dakar. There, the Finnish flag and a glass of milk revealed that Ari Vatanen and Bruno Berglund were victorious once again, as Stefan Petter-Hansel won in the bikes. Green was not a colour normally associated with previous Dakars, but the opening of South Africa's borders to international sportsmen meant that this year the Dakar now became the Paris-Cape Town rally. It would be a duel between the Mitsubishis and the Citroëns, with outsiders like Jean-Louis Schlesser in his buggy until he became lost in the desert. In the bikes, it was a Yamaha versus Kajiva battle again, with Peter Hansel looking out for his rivals. But Mitsubishi was soon in control on four wheels. In the villages of Africa, the interest was enormous and good-humoured in what was a unique event for them. They had never seen such a competition before. Stefan Petter-Hansel was a new star for them. Competitors such as Hubert Auriol appreciated new in-car entertainment, even if the competitive aspect of the event had largely gone with the desert, leaving him in the lead. On the tighter roads going through the African jungle, it was almost impossible to overtake. Citroën gambled on mud, but there was too little of it and too late, here seen on a liaison stage in the Congo. By now the positions were virtually settled. The Mitsubishis were out in front and unlikely to be overtaken. The bike competition was, however, a little closer. The Citroëns were fast, but some way further back, now on almost standard rally roads. The situation was so settled that Salvador Servia came up with his own in-car entertainment as he drove his Lada on the long liaison sections towards Cape Town. Hubert Auriol and co-driver Philippe Monet had navigational problems and a brief moment on the roof, but they weren't to lose the lead. Teammate Erwin Weber would have to settle for second.
It was a very difficult junction, and Hubert took the wrong. He was also taking for 2 kilometers the wrong road. We turned and then we found the right way, so I don't know how long he's searching.
Hubert Auriol may have been nervous, but he didn't have to worry. Overtaking had been virtually impossible since the desert had been left behind far to the north, and it would be very difficult to dislodge the Mitsubishi Pajero he shared with yachtsman Philippe Monet. The arrival and welcome in Cape Town were fantastic. There, Stefan Peter Hansel was hailed the winner, but his victory was saddened by the loss of his old rival, Gilles Lallet, in the fatal accident just before the Pointe Noire on a liaison section in the Congo. Mitsubishi's Oriol, Weber and Shinozuka completed a dominating hat-trick, while Peter Hansel's talent was confirmed. (1993), and the struggles for the lone rider were the same as they had been in all those preceding years. This event put the emphasis back on navigation, as the competitors were tested on a route which took them back to the Senegal capital, Dakar. The dunes of Grand Derg in Nigeria proved to be some of the toughest obstacles on the infamous Rally of Rallies. 1,200 kilometers to run across demanding terrain that would curtail the hopes of many challengers. The privateers suffered the physical strains and toils, many not reaching the finish by the early hours of the next morning. Bruno Sabi was first to arrive in his Mitsubishi, surprised by the difficulties encountered. Instead of looking and sounding like somebody who just won a stage, the strain of the long haul was obvious, and his tales of the loss of the GPS system, their use of the maps alone, and then attempting to cross almost impassable dunes confirmed the enormity of the task. And the others were even further behind, with the prospect of having to start all over again at daybreak. The Citroëns, victims of numerous punctures, accumulated more penalties for lateness, but everyone who made it to the rest hold were just relieved to be there and exhausted.
If you want to eat, eat and tea and coffee.
Tea.
Coffee.
Tea, okay.
Tea, okay?
By now, Bruno Sabi had just one true rival, Pierre Larty. The battle was on between Mitsubishi in the white corner and Citroën in the red corner. Bruno Sabi maintained the advantage, but had a worrying time on the eve of the final day, when he suffered problems with his navigational equipment. Thankfully, the leader of the bikes, Stefan Peter-Hansel, was on hand to show him the way home. The gratitude was clear. 1 year after his debut in rally raids, it was the first win for Bruno Sabi on the Dakar beach, ahead of the red Citroën of Lartigue and Hubert Auriol. Stefan Peter-Hansel put all his rivals in the shade from the first stage of the rally and took his third successive win on the event. Victory in the truck section went to Francesco Perlini. The Dakar returned to its original starting point of Paris for 1994 under the new administration of Fenouil, the former competitor, who replaced Gilbert Sabine. A route of 13,000 kilometres saw 2 of its stars missing. No entries for Stefan Peter-Hansel nor Ari Vatanen, but still a healthy start list of 259 competitors, around 100 more than the previous year. The 16th Dakar would be run both from and back to Paris, one of the main challenges being 600 kilometres of special stage through the Mauritanian dunes. The bike riders would have the most difficult task. Fenouil took the decision to neutralise this section after the problems encountered by the bikes. The individual riders helped one another as best they could, discussing the problems and trying to encourage their ability to get out to the end of the stage. The main loser of the day, in spite of the neutralisation of the stage, was the Spaniard Carlos Mas, who lay second overall to Eddie Orioli. A broken chain causing damage to the gearbox put him out. The race all over and nothing to do. The disappointment was obvious. Even the cars were embedded in the sand, but for them the stage continued. Pierre Lartigue in his Citroën had to become a mechanic in his attempt to continue. His 4-hour lead was in danger of evaporating. For once it looked like it was all lost in this enormous stage, and the others had a chance to gain time. Fenouil was steadfast in refusing to neutralise the stage for the cars. Finding the going impossible, the Citroëns gave up on the planned route, turned south, and earned heavy time penalties for missing the checkpoint. Lartigue and Auriol reached the bivouac at 4:30 in the morning. On the other hand, there was still no news of the Mitsubishi team of Sabi and Fontenay. The next morning the helicopters went to look for them. They found 4 men still determined to complete the original course. All night long, Musmara and Serres, the co-drivers, had been on their feet. All night long, Sabi and Fontenay had followed from behind the wheel, progressing metre by metre. a crazy battle with nature. Sabi's exhaustion was clear as he described the difficulties encountered, trying over and over and over again to make their way to the end. And in the end, it was all for nothing. The stewards decided to return to the positions the cars held before reaching the impossible dunes. With mechanics and drivers exhausted, Mitsubishi withdrew, leaving the way clear for Citroën. There was an impressive performance for Jérôme Rivière in his buggy. The bike event was a battle between Eddie Orioli and Jordi Arcarons. 48 hours before the finish, there was just 2 minutes between them. Arcarons, the Catalan, was hoping to be the first Spaniard to win the Dakar. Château Latour, the last special of the event, saw Arcarons gain only 30 seconds. Orioli was thus able to win by 1 minute 13 seconds, the narrowest margin in Dakar history. It was his third win on the rally. Pierre Lartigue won the cars for Citroën with co-driver Michel Perrin, and the first truck was that of Carole Lepre in 6th place overall. The Dakar resumed a more standard route in 1995 as the organisation was handed over to Hubert Auriol. 247 entries at the start, and from the first stage there was no great surprise as Ari Vatanen installed himself as the leader. At Mitsubishi, the strangely angled wheel did not signify a new Japanese technological discovery, just uncomfortable problems for Bruno Sabi, for whom the event brought very little good fortune. In 3rd place, Jean-Louis Schlesser in his prototype two-wheel drive buggy. On the bikes, the Austrian Heinz Kinnegadner established a lead in aggressive style on his single-cylinder KTM, profiting from the mechanical problems of Stefan Peter-Hansel. In Africa, the generosity and assistance given by the locals can make all the difference, as Ari Vatanen discovered when he hauled the radiator of his Citroën. But it was here that the challenge from Vatanen and co-driver Gilles Picard to win again came to an end. Picard, disappointed, explaining the problems, as Ari Vatanen couldn't even wait before getting on with the rest of the event, but the time had already been lost. Pierre Lartigue was now free to take over the lead of the event. And there was little Mitsubishi could do about it. Bruno Sabi was not going to win this time. Sabi losing time through navigation errors as well, which didn't help his cause at all. On the bikes, an American was riding for a Russian team, and Danny Laporte won one special stage in spite of the odd fall. Kinnegadner rode brilliantly but was unlucky. A broken engine and navigational problems dropped him down the order. In front, Peter Hansel was battling with Archerons for the lead, but Stefan was penalised for illegal servicing, which put Archerons ahead. The Frenchman was not to be downhearted, however, and inspired by the penalty, he attacked Archeron's lead to grab the win at the finish. Pierre Lartigue was the winner of the cars. Vartanen suffered a huge rollover in the latter stages, but thankfully both he and Picard were unhurt. And in the trucks, Lepre won for Tatra again. It's broken. Fabrizio Mioni, one of the favourites of 1996, explained his troubles early in the event. He wasn't the only one. It was a year of accidents on both 2 wheels and 4. Kenjiro Shinazuka points out the ditch that caught him unawares. And Mitsubishi's troubles continued, with Bruno Sabi also damaging his Pajero and becoming part of Mitsubishi's disappointing event. I just remember that we hit a bump, it caused the car to go over and then into a horrible roll. We were just trying too hard, but you have to run quickly. Jean-Pierre Fontenay became the sole representative of the Japanese manufacturer who could take the battle to Citroën. In front, the 2 red cars were driving as a team, with Vartanen and Lartigue trying to outdo each other. It was déjà vu for Vartanen as he was forced to stop in the middle of the desert to change a punctured tyre, only to find that the wheel refused to detach from the hub and the time ticked away. The crazy problem that would cost Vartanen and Picard the chance of victory. Vartanen lost 7 hours as the result of the problem. Peter Hansel, meanwhile, exploited the power of his Yamaha twin-cylinder on the high-speed stages. He led overall, but later, as a result of refueling problems, he was forced to retire. It was going well, he told us. The disappointment was clear. Putting it down to one of those things, the experienced competitor would not take another win on the Dakar. The favourites fell by the wayside. Kenny Gardner had an engine let go. The same problem for Magnaldi. In the dunes, Archerons was passed by Orioli, the 2 of them fighting for the lead. Behind them, the privateers, riding the adventure of their lives.
La moto est très lourde dans le sable. Elle engage toujours de devant. Et voilà. Ce qu'il faut pas faire, c'est la merde.
The camaraderie between the privateers is a crucial part of the Dakar event. Fabrice Roche ran out of fuel, but gets help from some of the other competitors. All part of the spirit created by Sabine those many years before. Before the last stage, the water after the sand, and Archerons drowned the engine of his motorbike. Orioli was able to pass into the lead. The finish at the Rose Lake saw the Italian Eddie Orioli take the win, and Pierre Lartigue once again won the cars.
Si je trouverai de l'argent, moi je vais payer le Mitsubishi. Ça c'est sûr, ça c'est...
The locals enjoying the Dakar, and apparently lots of support for Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi seemed to have it all wrapped up for 1997 with the withdrawal of Citroën following the ban of prototypes on the event. Mitsubishi reigned supreme, but the question was, which one would win? Bruno Sabi, Kenjiro Shinazuka, or Jean-Pierre Fontenay? They did have one serious rival, Jean-Louis Schlesser, in his two-wheel drive buggy, but unfortunately, his challenge did not last long. Sanyong competed with vehicles in an early stage of Dakar development, and both Tombe and Rivière were soon out. It was the same story for Toyota, with overheating problems putting Vonberg out. Local support for the stars of the Dakar evidenced here by the gift of a talisman for Stefan Pederhansel. And it seemed to work, because Pederhansel soon established his leading rhythm. Magnaldi was unable to keep up the pressure and was forced to retire. Jordi Archerons was holding on to second position. Once again, however, many riders were caught out by the difficulties encountered. The American, Danny Laporte, one of those fallen. And so was the experienced Austrian, Heinz Kinney-Gardner. Behind, all the competitors were eager to make the finish. Entries from all over the world, from all kinds of people, all with the same objective and the same dream of reaching Dakar.
Bosse-les, doucement, Lulu, doucement, doucement, doucement. Bosse-les, j'ai dit. Attention, Pierrot, hop. Eh oui. C'est pas indiqué. Mais il faut faire attention.
Three days before the finish, and Archerons fell victim to one of the many hazards of the route. The Spaniard, Oscar Gallardo, tried to maintain his country's hopes as David de Castera suffered a nasty fall almost within sight of the finish. He would finish in third place. Stefan Pederhansel, protected by his talisman, won his fifth Dakar and matched Cyril Neveu for total number of wins. In the cars, Sabi lost time stuck in the dunes and the intervention of team manager Ulrich Bremer was required in the battle between Shinozuka and Fontenay. The decision was given to the Japanese driver. A great performance was seen by Jutta Kleinschmidt, who won one stage in her two-wheel drive buggy and showed that good results can be achieved without factory assistance.
First time I make a scratch and then into Dakar. Woo!
We catch 15 minutes to Serbia.
The historic first win for a lady on a stage at the Dakar was announced by Hubert Auriol that evening.
Puisque la première fois depuis son existence, on a une véritable héroïne, Jutta Kleinschmidt, qui a gagné une spéciale.
To sum up 20 years of the Dakar is to know that the adventure continues.